Hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space 9.38. The Wrath of the Verminosaur. We almost went so far back in time to the last super long arc.
Hey, dear God, I'm feeling real verminous right
Of course you are, Skipper. I fucking hate you.
now.
Classic Skipper Dragon dialogue.
It's exactly how they talk to each other. Dragon would say the C word to demonetize Skipper.
Don't do it, Dragon. We need this to pay for the new slipstream. Sorry, old man.
Gemini. No, I'm not finishing that. Okay, welcome
Sorry,
back.
I used sound manipulation to mute your words. Now you can't demonetize me.
I had something that I didn't think about since it hadn't been discussed in the writing much, but like it would come up like if Aetheral Space was an anime, so I was curious. Because you did mention very early on that Dragon's like reinforce wasn't very good because he was new to it.
Yeah.
Implying that there's a skill grasp, right? So then I was thinking, because I remember I asked you a while back, couldn't anyone just make Heartbeat Shotgun as a technique if they thought of it? Because that seems pretty it's a resource you always have and it's good. But then I realized maybe it only works because Skipper's so strong at reinforcing that he can turn a heartbeat into something that's like a viable weapon. Is that the case, or is it just because like
that's part of it? Yeah.
Is his reinforce like way better than Dragon's reinforce?
I would say so.
Okay. Yeah, because he's like up
it's
there.
Like one thing, like being able to do something technically and actually being able to do it like on command.
Right. And how much of Aether like skill is talent versus sort of training? Because like we know there is bizarrely a genetic element to it, despite the fact gene tyrants don't have it. Because we know that
is less a genetic element, sort of connecting it to Aether itself, and more consciousness, which then connects to Aether. Like if you're more in touch with your consciousness, basically, is how the gene side of it works.
So it's very much something that comes from training, or at least from like personal development, more so than natural.
There are some freaks though, like Wu Ming, who can just he's just built different.
Yeah, his consciousness is so bizarre. I almost wonder if that implies that being neurodivergent would make you better and or worse at Aether.
Depends on like your Aether core.
Very interesting. Reports of riots. Does that mean if you meditate and keep your mind clear, you better at Aether as well?
Yeah,
you have a more purposeful mind. Interesting. Reports of riots are now coming in from aboard the Deus Nobiscum following the shocking leak earlier today. For those just now joining us, 3 hours and 50 minutes ago, a recording of a confidential Superbian meeting was leaked by a reliable source. In this recording, the Superbian Apex Bishop, Giovanni Sigma Testament, indicated that the Superbian Cardinals were in fact dead and that he was responsible for this. The Cardinals have not been seen in public for several weeks, with official statements indicating that they had gone into seclusion for personal reasons. Internal Superbian sources have thus far refused to comment. However, Humulus sources have confirmed that their Apex Bishop Gertrude Hearth has indeed passed away, as was also indicated on the leaked recording. The eyes of the final church are now on the Deus Nobiscum, and how the Superbian Apex Bishop will respond to this leak. Broadcast report. Bright Eye FC. I already know what your fun fact's going to be about. It's going to be about what Bright Eye FC is. Grimsley Del Yart loved his sword. Like, really loved it. If his sword were a lady, he'd fuck it.
What's wrong? You saying you wouldn't?
This implies that, like, if sword guys want to fuck their swords, this guy's like the fuck boy of swords, and Musazi's like the I would do anything for my queen of swords. I treat her like a princess.
All that was swords are queens, Grimsley.
If it swings, it's a thought! Oh my god. That was how much he liked it. But it weren't, so he wouldn't. Plus, he didn't want to get his dick cut off. Ah, classy. For one, his sword was sharp. For another, his sword was shiny. It was the kind of sword that stood out in the crowd. And that was what Grimsley wanted. People didn't give you no money if they couldn't see what they was being threatened with, after all. Take today, for example. He was holding up some Paradisus pansy against the alley wall. Half the freak's implants and beat boops smashed and sparking from the first punch Grimsley had given him. But even though Grimsley would have won beating on him, the idiot's eyes weren't on Grimsley. No, they was on his sword. Grimsley was holding it right under the tin head's chin, ready to cut his throat if he tried anything funny. It was reflecting the lights far above all pretty-like, making it look like it was glowing. Grace token, Grimsley growled, pressing the blade just a little bit tighter against the Paradisus. Transfer it over. No funny business or I kill you. I think I misunderstood this accent. It's okay.
Keep going. Don't worry.
The tin head nodded just a tiny bit, probably because he was scared of cutting his own neck open. Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his grace token, the white disc reflecting a bit of light just like Grimsley's sexy sword. This is weird because it's not first person, but the narration is clearly turned to reflect his thought process. Grimsley pulled out his own grace token, a proxy that the lupine had sold him, and pressed it against the tin heads. All your grace and free spending, Grimsley demanded. Approve it. Don't be fucking funny or I'll kill her.
Kill you, sorry.
The tin head murmured. Come on, I'm begging you. Just leave me something, Grimsley tightened his hold. Are you being fucking funny? The Paradisus looked deep into Grimsley's eyes, and what was there made him shake his head. Grimsley was an intimidating bloke, after all. Couldn't blame him. Transfer approval, the tin head said, voice hoarse. Chestahedron, all grace and free spend. The tin head stopped talking and his eyes widened. Oh no, that means something's happening in Aetheral Space. Grimsley felt hot anger flood into his brain.
You know you're in Aetheral Space with your eyes wide in a hallway fight.
New drinking game is read an arc of Aetheral Space and take a shot every time someone's eyes widen and then die.
Or they throw their brow.
How many clasp their hands. How many
Behind
warnings did this How many warnings did this idiot need? Before he could finally cut the tin head's throat, though, Grimsley heard a sound. The sound of a single footstep landed behind him. But that didn't make no sense. If someone was coming, he didn't
I like
know
how it didn't make no sense at the same moment I thought I should add that.
I have become Grimsley. I'd advise you to let the man go, said a voice from behind him. Grimsley turned to look over his shoulder. Standing there was a young guy with long black hair tied back, wearing a dark long coat. His grey eyes gave Grimsley a funny look, like he was looking down on him. Grimsley gritted his teeth in frustration. Listen, mate, he snarled, whirling around. And that was as far as he got. With a single thrust of his palm, the newcomer slammed Grimsley to the ground, sending his sword clattering to the floor. Grimsley wheezed, trying to pick himself up and falling. It was like he'd been hit by a car. The newcomer glanced at the tin head. Leave, he said gently. You're safe now. The tin head wasted no time, stuffing his grace token into his pocket and hurrying off. Then, those grey eyes turned back to Grimsley. They really were looking down on him now. Getting up was still more than he could handle, but Grimsley managed to crawl back a little as the newcomer approached, fear causing his body to shake. Come on, mate, he said desperately. You got me, you saved that fella, right? That's what you wanted, yeah? Just let me go, okay? I'm just a little guy, come on! The newcomer squatted down next to him, and Grimsley instinctively winced. Still, no attack came. Give me a break, Grimsley squeaked, squeezing his eyes shut. I will, the newcomer promised, holding one finger up. On one condition. Grimsley opened his eyes again. What? The newcomer pointed to the sword lying on the ground. You let me borrow that. Popcorn Gazette took, throat taps.
Grizzly reduced your lifespan.
It did.
Getting onto the Deus Nobiscum was less difficult than Dragon had expected. Unlike last time, the security on the ship was in chaos due to the events aboard. So he, Ruth, Bruno and Serena managed to slip onto it right before the net closed. After receiving the message from Skipper, Dragana quickly learned that he wasn't the only one who'd received such information. Apparently the original sender of the message was a Superbian official named Isabel Pye Testament, probably related to Giovanni, who'd gone missing since leaking the data. Riots had sprung up throughout the civilian population on the Deus Nobiscum since it had spread out, and Anna Vox Day was mostly occupied dealing with that situation. Still, the place was chaos. Dragon had managed to bribe the captain of a cargo vessel to take them aboard while he made a scheduled delivery, and though they were on the ship proper, he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Security officers sprinting down corridors as fast as their legs could take them, Superbian flags ablaze in the middle of living quarters, stained glass shattered and left to litter the floor. The tranquility the ground seen when they visited the chapel had utterly vanished. Getting suitable disguises hadn't been much of an issue. Red robes and a haughty demeanour seemed to do the job as well as anything else. Dragon pulled his hood down low as he and his group made their way through a transport hub that seemed to have become something of a civil battlefield. So we're aboard, Bruno muttered, walking alongside him. What do we do now? Skipper really didn't give us any orders? I don't take orders from that guy, Dragon said automatically, before pulling out a script to glance at the file again. No instructions either. Still? Still what? Ruth asked, bringing up the rear. Despite Dragon's insistence, she hadn't pulled up her hood, her distinctive ginger hair out for all to see. Well, maybe all the contacts we need is the file itself, Dragon ventured, stepping out the way of a passing security officer. Bruno raised a nearly unseen eyebrow. How do you mean? The one who sent this is this Isabel Pye Testament person, right? Dragon said. I kept up to date on the news while we were on our way here. Word is that the Superbians still haven't found her. Maybe if we find her, the next step will become more obvious. How exactly are we going to do that? Dragon nodded to the station at the heart of this transport hub, where trains took workers to what part of the ship was required. Even with everything going on, the trains still seem to be running. Aetherping, he said. I've had some practice recently doing it rapid bursts. I take the train all the way around, pinging the whole time. I'll send you guys the locations of Aether users who seem to be hiding away from other people. That way we can search the whole ship quickly. Bruno frowned. That means leaving you alone, though. You sure about that? Serena frowned too. Last time we did that, you almost ended up dying. I don't want you to almost die again, Mr. Dragon. Well, I'd rather avoid that too, Dragon said, his voice droll. So I'll make sure it doesn't happen. Trust me. Ruth crossed her arms, biting her lip. This doesn't seem like the best plan ever, not gonna lie. She glanced around the area, at the agitation of the crowds trying to board civilian transports, and the security forces trying to keep them contained, especially with all this stuff going on. Dragon ran a hand over his face, becoming agitated. Look, he said, we can't argue about this all day. With civilian trains like that, there's no telling how long the worker transport will be up and running for. Do you trust me? Ruth nodded. Of course. Then trust me. We can do this. She exchanged a glance with Bruno and Serena before finally, and reluctantly, nodding. Fine, Bruno growled. Just don't get careless, okay? Dragon smirked. Never. Popcorn.
Jean Lyons ran his hands over the final piece of the plan, the slightest trace of pride in his posture and smile. The device was cylindrical, but intentionally featureless, without lights or controls through which its purpose could be discerned. It was perfect in its absence. He dealt with He dealt with humanists.
Oh, sorry.
He dealt with the.
Sorry, this sentence has been mangled.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting stun locked.
There we go.
The humanists had been dealt with by cutting off their head. The Superbians would be dealt with by driving their mastermind to despair, which left the Paradisus. The device Jean had loaded into the tiny shuttle was at the forefront of supremacy technology, straight from the absurd weapons lab itself. Oh, that's a fun fact. Write that down for something to elaborate on. Same with that news group. Jean's research had exposed a deficiency in the Paradisus' defense, and once he used that deficiency to get this device aboard the Eliza, they were as good as dealt with as well. This had been an invigorating mission, all things considered, but Jean had begun to tire of it. So many factors to consider, and so much instability within his own subordinates. It would be good to wipe the slate clean. Perhaps he'd take some vacation days once he got back to the Supremacy. Atlantica would like that as well, he slyly imagined. He checked the straps holding the cylinder down one more time before turning to look out the back of the shuttle. It's secure, he began. Prepare for... He'd intended... Oh, wait, this is John Lyons. It's secure, he began. Prepare for... He'd intended to speak to Solstice and Equinox, the only two units he had that were still stable and usable. However, they were not standing before him. Instead, their hefty bodies were lying on the ground, clearly unconscious or dead. The one standing before him was a toy Musashi. We have matters to discuss, Mr. Lyons, he said, voice cold. He looked a little worse for wear, his face bruised and painted with dried blood, and blood dripped from the sword he was holding as well, which Jean supposed answered how exactly he'd done away with Solstice and Equinox. Even so, given what Jean had heard about Gertrude Harth's interrogation methods, Musashi was in much better condition than he'd expected. Not good enough condition to make a difference, but still. Jean clasped his hands behind his back, looking impassively down at Musashi from the top of the boarding ramp. Wait, what'd you say?
There we go, he clasped his hands.
Take a shot. If I may ask, he said calmly, how did you find this location? I don't recall telling you about it. Musashi flicked his blade through the air, splattering the remaining blood onto the ground. Helga Malwarian pointed me in the right direction. She is familiar with how you operate. From there, it was a matter of searching. Jean raised an eyebrow. Should I take that as confirmation that Helga has betrayed me, then? I'm not sure you should be speaking of betrayal to anyone, Musashi glared. Why did you send Olga to kill me? He knew about that then. Well, since he wasn't dead, it was clear that he knew about that. Jean sighed. You'd become more of a liability than an asset, he explained, so I went to get rid of you. It's as simple as that. Sorry. Musashi took a step forward, fury in his eyes, white aether crackling around his body and sword. The blade in his hand began to gently glow. What an annoyingly flashy aether tick. The same as that man's. Wait, has this ever been brought up before?
Yeah, when he uses aether, his weapon glows.
I don't remember that. Holy shit, that's cool. Sorry? Musashi snarled, squeezing the hilt of his sword. You send me to do your dirty work, send a child to stab me in the back, and then say sorry? Yes.
Giga-shad.
Musashi shifted his stance slightly, getting ready to launch himself forward. His eyes narrowed, visibly locking onto Jean's form, calculating the killing angle. The mechanisms of a warrior never changed. Once you told me of your past, Musashi growled, his grim eyes reflected on the surface of his blade, of how you once opposed the supremacy, and of how you and your friends were annihilated. Having gone through that, having experienced all of that, how can you betray others so easily? Jean furrowed his brow. Oppose the supremacy? What are you... Oh, the memory popped back up. I did tell you something like that, didn't I? Forgive me, that was a lie for the purpose of emotional manipulation. Musashi stared at Jean for a second, dumbfounded, and then he leapt off the ground. Lions! He roared, crossing the distance in a second, swinging his sword horizontally with all his might. Jean did not move as Musashi appeared right in front of his face. Jean did not move as his sword drew close to splitting his head in half, and Jean did not move as the weapon finally made contact. Musashi's sword gently brushed against Lion's cheek. It was as if he just caressed the other man's face with it. The touch of the blade was so soft that it didn't even draw blood. Lion smirked, resting one finger on the surface of the blade. Is that all you have to offer, Mr. Musashi? What? Musashi muttered. What did you... Bang! The blade exploded utterly, shards of metal flying in every direction, only failing to slice the two of them apart due to their aether defenses. Still, Musashi reflexively winced, closing his eyes for just a moment as the metal shards flew past. The second he did that, he felt Lions gently place up his palm against his chest. He didn't know Lions had done it, but he didn't know how Lions had done it, but he destroyed his sword with just a touch. If that same ability could be applied to a human body, then... Move! Musashi went to leap back, but too late. Bang! The impact felt like he'd been hit by a starship. Before he could blink or even breathe, Musashi was sent flying out of the back of the shuttle, through the crates and equipment that littered the hangar bay, and into the far metal wall with enough force that he left a sizable crater lodging him in place. All the air was instantly pushed out of his lungs, and he felt the breaking of bones throughout his body. His head hung, blood leaking from his mouth, and his consciousness sinking into a deep, dark pit. Popcorn.
I've got one I think might be her, Dragon said, script pressed to his ear as he reached the last stop. See, as I edit on the fly there. Sending you her location now. I'm at the last stop. Well, I don't need to say that, actually. I was ahead of myself. I'm at the last stop. I'll be on my way back to the first station after this. He heard Ruth's voice on the other end of the call. You gonna meet back up with us? Dragon looked out at the platform, and that pretty much answered the question for him. At first he just shook his head before realising Ruth couldn't see that over the phone. No, he said. It'd take too much time. You guys set off now and I'll head back to guard the ship. Sound good? Ruth snorted. Sounds like you're just trying to keep yourself out of danger, but whatever. We'll find you after we've got her. Don't die. I don't think that's too likely, Dragon lied before ending the call. The worker train had been sparse to begin with, but by the final station he was now the only person in any of the compartments. The vehicle was fully automated too, so there was no driver or staff on board either. That was probably for the best. It would have caused a commotion if the Apex Bishop was waiting on the platform for them after all. Giovanni Sigma Testament stood alone on the empty platform, his red eyes locked onto Dragon's blue ones as the train slowly pulled in. The train itself was suspended by cords connecting it to the track above, the vehicle hanging over a mechanical abyss. And for a horrible second, Dragon thought that Giovanni would simply attack those connections and drop him into the darkness. But no. Instead, he just waited for the train doors to open, and quietly stepped inside. He stood opposite Dragon, just a few metres separating them. At first, there were no words between them, just silent stirs as the doors closed and the train slowly began moving again. Dragon was the first to speak. Is there any point in asking how you found me? I remember the feel of your aether from last time, Giovanni replied, his voice sounding dull and dead. You weren't exactly subtle with those pings. You must have expected I'd find you. Well, Dragon smirked. Maybe a little. Giovanni glanced down at the script still in Dragon's hands. You told your friend you'd meet back up. Is that okay? Dragon stuffed the script back into his pocket. I don't intend on that being a lie. How about you? With everything going on, I'm sure you have better things to do than come after me. You confessed to murdering the Cardinals, and that recording's all over the media now. Isn't that a bigger issue? As the train picked up speed, light from the static electricity that accumulated outside flickered through the windows, illuminating their faces in a pale glow. Giovanni's expression did not change. It takes 15 minutes for this train to reach the first station after completing the loop, he said calmly. I can spare 15 minutes. Once you're dead, I'll get back to those more important matters you speak of. Besides, you want to fight me too, don't you? Dragon adopted a combat stance, fists held up in front of him. We do owe each other some limbs, after all. Petty revenge is one of my favourite hobbies. What a coincidence, I'm exactly the same. Once you're dead, Jamie will rest in peace. Then I can go ahead and forget about you. You sound confident. Guess that's what all that time playing God gets you. I'm not playing. There was silence for a moment further, lingering only until the train switched to a new section of track and shook slightly. First verse, Giovanni...
Gemini shotgun! Sorry, I wanted it to be at the same time.
Giovanni declared, twin spears of red crystal firing from over his shoulders. Gemini shotgun, Dragon cried, electric blue aether flaring around him.
I thought it would be cool, but it was probably just a mess. Alright. Very, very good. It looks like we're having our final confrontation here between these two. So there's a couple things I think you could fun fact here. You could talk about the Absurd Weapons Lab. You could probably talk about that news group.
Well,
how does news get distributed in the galaxy?
There's different news corporations. So as you mentioned, there are some state-runs by the Supremacy. So those are sort of propaganda mostly, run by the body.
Well, more we talked about how like internet and like things can't really travel too well between planets or systems. So like, how do they get news out fast enough?
Well, news travels slowly, depending on where you are, of course. The Silver Eye is a... was it Silver Eye? Yeah, Silver Eye is basically Bright Eye, even, is basically a big news corporation that has lots of different branches for different locations. Bright Eye FC is Bright Eye Final Church, which is sort of amorphous based on where the heads of the Final Church are based.
Because I was thinking, like, with the way news travels, in theory, if you were fast enough, you could theoretically stop news from spreading if you were to, like, isolate the area.
It'd be very difficult to isolate the entire planet, like, on your own.
Yeah, that's true.
In Arc 3, we did have some mention of Bright Eye Talden as well, so Bright Eye is a big news corporation with lots of branches throughout the UAP and the Final Church there.
Who runs Bright Eye?
George Bright Eye.
Wow.
It's a family business.
Fair enough. Family business?
Yeah, he's like...
Huge corporation.
Yeah. He's like Bruce Wayne.
We keep all the money.
He's like Bruce Wayne, I've just decided he's also a vigilante.
He doesn't have any Aether, he just dresses up. And
yes, he's not an Aether user, but
he's
trained in so many martial arts and stuff.
Yeah, he's just like an Aether user.
He's just like that, man.
He uses pressure points. Oh, man.
And the Absurd Weapons Lab is basically a station in the Supremacy where criminal scientists are sent to do government research. So if you've done illegal experimentation and you don't want long jail time, you go to the Absurd Weapons Lab and build some crazy shit for them.
Okay. I had another question, since Aether is sort of derived from consciousness. If you were to take like hallucinogenic or like psychoactive drugs, could that affect your Aether?
It could.
Interesting. Alright, well thank you guys for watching as always. And we will see you next time on Aetheral Space 9.39. The Wrath of an Even Larger Verminous Rat.
Will Muzazi make it out okay? Will Dragon beat Giovanni? What will happen?
If I understood the visual correctly, I believe he just got Kakyoined, right?
He got fucking blasted across the fucking room, yeah.
Well, also, like, when that happened to Gertrude, her, like, midsection was gone, right?
But that seemed to be, like, an explosion from inside of her.
Well, hopefully he makes it.
Kakyoin! He was suddenly blown away!
Yeah, his last thoughts were not of his parents, but on the riddle before him.
Like,
what is the nature of John Lyne's ability? Yeah, how it works. Oh my
How
god.
do you think it works?
All right.
'Cause
I think he touches something and then he leaves something in it, and
But
then
how-
he can trigger that thing.
how
to
did he
explode.
not get his head fucking cut off?
I think what happens is he has some sort of like passive technique, like sort of like like an aether suit around him that absorbs like the shock or like force of things coming at him, and then he reapplies that force and explosions to the
Interesting.
things he touches. That's my current.
Oh,
running
you're very
theory.
smart. But that's the end of the episode.
All right, thank you guys. Next time, bye.
Bye.